Right, let's get reaction from Takatso Aviation spokesperson Thulasizwe Simelane. A very good evening to you, Thulas. Thank you for your time. Now, after some delays in this deal, the Competition Commission has now approved the merger with conditions. Talk us through some of those conditions.
Well, for the major conditions, and I'll talk to them in just a minute, but I do need to say that as Takatso Aviation, we note the recommendation from the Competition Commission, and we consider it to be, there's no doubt that it's a major milestone in terms of the trajectory of the transaction to get us to the point where we finally clear merger clearance. So having cleared the first part, which is Competition Commission, we now move on to Competition Tribunal. But the end goal is, of course, to keep progressing to the point where this transaction is finally, closed and done and dusted, and we're able to implement many of all these plans that we have for SAA becoming a viable, agile, continually sustainable, airline that is backed by a proper, business case for it. Having said all of that, the conditions that are attached are, one, it's called divestiture, but in simple language, it's just a condition that says our minority shareholders, Global Aviation and Ceramics, must divest from Takatso. The other condition has to do with maintaining a minimum staff complement for a period of time for about 5 years at SAA.
So you talk about wanting to have the deal, being done and dusted. As Takatso, having accepted these conditions, in terms of timelines, how soon can we now expect this deal to be finalized?
I can't give you a sense of the timelines, and it's always a difficult question, Mpho, about giving timelines. But what I can say is signal what the next stop is, because that's certain. The next stop is the Competition Tribunal, and we look forward to progressing it there, and we're quite confident as Takatso that we can, and we have the capability and the wherewithal to see that through and see it all the way to transaction close. But there's still a whole lot of other conditions that all the parties to the transaction are individually fulfilling as they relate to them. And certainly one of the big ones on our part is the question of the 3 billion rand that Takatso Aviation will inject into SAA's operations. So this is operational financing funding for SAA. And as far as raising that is concerned, that's well underway. It's advanced at this point, all the internal governance issues having been attended to for us to engage the market about raising this 3 billion rand. We're confident that we'll be able to do that. We sometimes hear people raising stories about Takatso doesn't have the capacity. We saw recently someone who, was in a spot of bother in as far as their employer is concerned. I don't want to talk about that person, but we saw them raising that ability, and we said, what has happened that has led to people doubting our ability to do that, given who is behind Takatso Aviation?
Yeah.
So that is the conversation that we're having about moving forward, getting ready to implement the solid business plan that we've crafted for SAA.
So you speak about this 3 billion rand cash injection. Just remind us how this deal is structured. 51% owned by Takatso, and what does it mean in terms of the hierarchy?
Well, it's 51% owned by Takatso and 49% by government through the Department of Public Enterprises as shareholder, or whatever permutations in terms of the government's model of share ownership and state-owned entities. But one of the things that people seem to never mention as well is that in addition to that, there is the preferred share that government gets of up to 3 billion rand. That preferred share, in simple language, it means that as and when dividends are declared, SAA, the coffers of the state, as the government as shareholder, is the preferred shareholder. Basically, even before other shareholders, have first take, for lack of a better word, government will have that, and that goes directly into the national fiscus. That's one of the things that people don't emphasize, but also the broader, benefits of a strategic equity partner for SAA. In that, in the future, SAA should have, backed by a proper business plan, proper management, adequately and optimally staffed at the right levels. It should be sustainable such that if it ever runs into market difficulties, conditions change, its own balance sheet would be able to sustain SAA going to be able to raise whatever monies it needs to raise instead of knocking on the door of the taxpayer. And that really is the essence of this conversation, as well as the benefits, of course, to the aviation sector, which right now has high demand, low supply, and the South African economy is not benefiting from that situation.
Yeah. Just going back to some of the concerns that were raised that resulted in delays. One was Takatso's shareholders' global aviation operation having access to SAA's sensitive information. How was that eventually resolved, or has it been resolved at all?
Well, the Competition Commission proposes that the minority shareholders divesting from Takatso would mitigate those concerns, basically that the tribunal should approve the transaction going forward with that condition. What we have to say, Mpho, is that in many ways this vindicates the position that Takatso took very early on of basically just, being circumspect about, even as we were navigating through the Competition Commission processes, we had to be circumspect about these concerns and how to mitigate around them. So when all of that was happening, you would have heard conversations that were saying some of our shareholders are being closed out and we're not being transparent, etc., etc. This is exactly what we were foreseeing at that point and basically seeking to mitigate, because this whole process has been about how best you can get this transaction finalized and closed such that the strategic equity partner starts adding value to SAA. So that's really the essence of that conversation. How it plays out going forward, we couldn't engage on this conversation at all until we had a decision and a recommendation from the Competition Commission. Now that we have that, the conversation then happens within the shareholders and partners within Takatso Aviation with a view to seeing how we implement and how we carry forward this recommendation in the interests of the transaction, the South African economy benefiting from a sustainable SAA.
Very well. Thank you so much, Thulasizwe.